Welcome to the EmpowHer podcast, episode 1. Let's start off with getting to know my story, a little bit about what I do, and what to expect from this podcast. So, I live on the Gold Coast. I am a father wound and relationship coach. I help women move from pain to freedom in their relationships with their intimate relationships, stemming from difficult dynamics with their father. So whether or not you've had challenging times with your father in the past as you've been growing up, whether it can be physical abuse, verbal abuse, or abandonment issues, traits such as narcissistic behaviors and things like that, we tend to attract what we know. And sometimes that ends up being our romantic partner. As weird as it sounds, we attract what we know, and our conditioning doesn't help us find the right partner if we come from relationships that have been difficult with our fathers. So I am here to help you break the cycle and break the pattern of having the relationships that no longer serve you, that no longer have a purpose in your life, that no longer bring you joy or happiness. And we start by doing that by having the awareness. And that is key to everything in life, and where everything starts is from awareness. So this podcast is going to help you understand what you want and what you need in relationships, to also have the awareness of how you can improve as a person and break and change the barriers that are holding you back in life. Most importantly, we can work on conditioning and making sure that we don't follow in the same footsteps that we did and it didn't serve a purpose. I do want to tell you a little bit about my story and what has, I guess, driven me to start the business, to start the podcast. So with my coaching, the whole purpose of doing this is wanting to make impact on everyday females who want to live a better life. So the relationship that I had with my father was very on and off through my whole entire life, from a young age up until 25. And there was a lot of different behaviors on his behalf, like narcissistic traits, lying, verbal abuse, and abandonment. And I think for me, if I had known what I know now in my life, my relationships and my path would be very, very different. So I think that's the whole reason that I have so much passion about wanting to help people's lives, is I have what I believe the tools and the information that can help you get out of a place that is not safe anymore, that I was once at. And I do have many different pivotal stories with the relationship with my father. However, I am going to just pick one, and I'm sure over the next couple of months you can hear more. I think it's really important to share parts of my story so that people do have an understanding of why I do the work and why I can do the work. So I'm going to start with probably one of the hardest stories for me, with the situation that happened with my dad, so you can have a bit of an understanding. It's almost like, where do I start? How do I skip like 25 years of my life to didn't come to this story? But I do want you to understand what I was going through and the behaviors that my father did show. And I also will state, while I'm saying this is my story and this is my side and the truth of what I experienced. I'm not here to sit here and bag my father and say he wasn't good enough, he didn't show up for me. And I want to acknowledge that that is his story and that's his life, and he has made some decisions that I believe are not the right ones and they're not healthy. And this is me sharing my story and me being vulnerable. However, I'm not here to say he is a bad person, and I don't have respect for Dad, because at the end of the day, he's blood and he is my dad. So I just wanted to make that super clear. But I do speak the truth, and I speak from the heart, and I speak with vulnerability. And I want this to be a safe place for guests that do come onto this podcast, have the opportunity to be vulnerable with their stories too. So That's one thing you'll definitely be getting from me is a lot of emotion and vulnerability. So let's get to the story. I had a very close relationship with my granddad, which was on dad's side. And because I'm Italian, I called him Nonno. Nonno always had my back. Nonno knew what dad was like, his behaviours, and there had been a lot of talk where he, kind of supported mum and said, I think it's time you get a DVO on him or a restraining order. So he always had my best interest at heart, and he always did remind mum that, there are other options without us holding judgment because we understand what he's like. So for me, whenever I stayed with my grandparents, because, you do the whole 1 week on, 1 week off, 2 weeks of school holidays, you go and stay with your grandparents and your dad. And that was always really bloody challenging for me because the anxiety that would come up and the tears and the screaming of being like, I don't want to go, I don't want to spend time with dad. Whether or not it was from past experiences or it's just the fact that I was a mummy's girl and it was just me and mum and that's what I was used to. I don't know. There was nothing in particular, I just didn't want to go essentially. So we were doing, it was time to go see my grandparents at one point. And I actually remember the last time I saw my granddad. I was probably about 17 and I was walking out the door and he was sitting in his recliner chair as I do, watching some form of sport. And I just said, see you, Nonno. I'll see you soon. Love you lots. And for some reason I was I feel like this is the last time I'm ever going to see him. But then I was also don't be ridiculous. Move on. And then Dad and I must have had a bit of a falling out, and I think we didn't speak for about a year to 6 months. However, I did my best to stay in contact with my grandparents where I could. So I would dip and flow between how I was feeling because I guess the arguments and the things that I had with my father would tarnish the relationship a little bit with my grandparents, especially my grandmother. So I did always have Nonno in the back of my head. So I would, either give them a call or I wouldn't hear back from them, or I'd leave a message and I wouldn't hear from them. Or sometimes I just wouldn't call and life goes on and you think, oh, maybe I'll hear from them soon. I went through a lot of phases in life where Dad and I would, be in contact for 1 year to 2 years and then we wouldn't speak for 5 years because of a scenario that would happen. So it was almost like a repeating pattern. And this is what I'll touch on a little bit later as well, our conditioning and what we're used to. And then we kind of live in this cycle, and that's the cycle that we need to break. And that's the cycle that should have been broken very early on. So then we were stuck in this cycle, and I was actually at Toowong Shopping Centre in Brisbane with Mum, and I was like, Mum, I just really miss my dad. I just feel like reaching out to him. It's been maybe a year, 6 months to a year. And she was like, well, darling, just reach out. So I sent him a message of being like, hey, Dad, thinking of you, really miss you. And of course, I got quite a interesting message back. It was like, oh, nice to hear from you. Yeah, of course, I miss you too, but this is something that you chose. It was always blame, which was really hard for me. And I think that goes into, I'm not good enough, or I'm the one with the issue. I keep stuffing up. It's my fault. And I think as a parent, you need to hold some form of responsibility. And he definitely didn't do that. And he would do anything to blame someone else for his pain. So we got into this cycle of just messaging back and me just trying to prove my point of just hear me, Dad. Hear my side and hear what I'm trying to tell you is I miss you and I love you, but all you're hearing or all you're thinking about is I haven't heard from you in a year. It's not good enough. And I ended up at my other grandparents with Mum, and I was still in this vortex of a back and forth messaging, and I kind of sat back on the chair at my grandparents' house and I was kind of giggling because I was like, what is going on? Is it meant to be this hard? There was a lot of name calling, bringing Mum into the situation and just excuse after excuse. And I started to get to the point where I was like, okay, this has gone too far. I'm starting to get quite shaky. And I started to read my heart is getting so fast, like even thinking about reading this message. And I started to read over the message, and it started with, you know, you can and should do better. I'm your father. If you had made more of an effort to be a part of my life, you would know that your grandfather died 6 months ago. And that still to this day, like, sends like a shiver through my whole entire body. And I said to myself, whatever you do, don't cry on the podcast. But like I said, I do want to be vulnerable and keep it as natural and real as possible. And my heart is literally beating out of my chest right now. But I think I got up at that point and, you know, like just before you're going to pass out, I was just like completely and utterly dizzy. I couldn't actually finish the text message. I actually read over it potentially like 3 times. And I was like, nah, surely not. And I think towards the end of the message, it was like, you didn't get to say goodbye to him. You'll never get to say goodbye to him. And use this as a lesson that family comes first, and this is your punishment. So at that point, I ran over to I think I collapsed on my other granddad and just fell on him, and I kind of like passed the phone to mum, and mum screamed because obviously mum had a really close relationship with Nono as well. And I can't even explain like what even happened after that, because it all became blurry. Like I needed to sit down. I think I started like uncontrollably crying, because this is like the one person that I felt safe with on that side of the family, and I felt robbed from everything and not being able to tell him I loved him or say goodbye to him or even go to a funeral. And then I think mum got on the phone to my grandma and went into like, you know, what has happened? Like, why wasn't Jamila told? Why was no one told? And she unfortunately has fallen for whatever dad has said. And, you know, she mentioned things like, you know, I thought you knew. And mum was like, you know, we don't know. We had no idea. And if we did know, we would have been there. So then that's just a little bit of a brief backstory of like the behavior and I guess the way my dad would show up in the relationship that I had with him. And then just to finish off that story, I think potentially 5 years later, or even maybe 10, we did start to rekindle a relationship. Like I said, it was this like cycle that we had. 2 years on, 2 years off. Maybe it was 5 years on, maybe it was 5 years off. And it was always starting with me reaching out, and then he would kind of say his 2-piece and I'd be like, let's move forward and get past this. Like, I want to have my father in my life. And it was me forever wanting to feel love and care from the other person that brought me into this world, and I was never feeling it. And I even was being disrespected in the process of trying to rebuild that relationship, but I ignored it anyway. And this is where I will get to at the end of the podcast, as you know, this is knowing when to cut the cord and break the cycle. So to finish on that story, I ended up having dinner at Dad's house many, many years later, and he was cooking for me, and the relationship was actually going pretty well. But as I say, I put up with things that I shouldn't have, and I kind of tried to blind-eye it, like pretend I couldn't see it, because I wanted this relationship with my father that I had always dreamed of, that I knew I was never going to get. And I'm sitting there about to eat dinner, and Dad is like very eclectic. Like, he had all these like cool little trinkets in his like cabinet next to the dining table. And I kind of like looked up and I was like, oh, just having a little look at what's in there. And in there is like, I actually don't know what you call it, but like a funeral card, pretty much saying like, thank you for coming and celebrating the life of Carlo Bonvenia. And I was told that there was no funeral. They pretty much just cremated him and spread his ashes, and that there was no chance that I could have even said goodbye to him if I wanted to, because they did it in far away or something or other. There was all these different excuses. And for me, I always was like, I'm sure they would have done something. And I'd ask Dad like repetitively, like, did you have a funeral for Carlo? And it was always like, no, never, no way. And I looked up and I saw this, and his back was towards me, and I read the card, and it was, thanking everyone for like celebrating his life, and like the run sheet of like how the funeral looked. And I just I think I dropped the card and I just felt sick. I stopped eating. I kind of put on a front that I was like, I just need to get out of here. And at this point I was in Cleveland, so I was driving back to Brisbane. And if anyone knows what the drive is in and out of Cleveland, it's just this one-way road. And I was just like, get me out of here. I couldn't get home quick enough. Like, it was almost took me back to what I felt when I found out that he died, because I was like, it's another lie. And to be honest, it was just like heartbreaking. And I know for you guys, it might be hard to understand that, but until you're in a situation like that and you are robbed from saying goodbye to someone that you love, because it is a test and also a punishment because I didn't make enough effort to call or see my grandparents. So I'll leave that story with you there. There are so many different stories that I feel like have shaped who I am today, and I guess like why I show up the way that I do. Whether that was, I think, in the past more than anything, with anxiety or low self-esteem, or I lacked boundaries, lacking communication skills, because I felt, if I communicate this, it's only going to backfire. So what's the point? So this relationship with my father has shaped me, I think, up until, my early 20s. But being a 13, 14-year-old girl and having been treated the way that I had, and the fear that I had with the relationship with my father, I didn't know any different. So when I started going into my first relationship with my first ever boyfriend, the first few months was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, I've never been treated like this in my life. And it was like very much the flowers, and I mean, it was first love as well. Like, everyone knows what that's like. It's like butterflies in the stomach when you touch their hand and you're still really, really young. But as that relationship went on, there was the narcissistic behaviors, there was physical abuse, there was verbal abuse, there was threatening. And these are a lot of the traits that my father showed in the relationship that I had with him. But at the point in the relationship with this person, I never actually saw it as bad. I was like, well, this is normal. This is how I've always been treated. It's me. There's something wrong with me. I have to make the change somehow. Like, how do I make him not want to yell at me? How do I make him not threaten me? What can I do to change? Like, I'm the one with the issue. I always have been. And it's this conditioning that you get from that behaviors of an adult that is supposed to show up for you and raise you. And I didn't know any different. I had to teach myself. I had to learn the hard way for many, many years, and I'm sure a lot of women have. And even that relationship in itself empowers me so much to do the coaching, to do the podcast, to make change, to even just have a conversation with a friend that's in a relationship that is no longer serving them, to make the pivot and the change so that they don't have to keep reliving something that no longer serves them. So with that, and bits and pieces of my story that I will share with you along the road of the EmpowHer podcast, which is super exciting, I also wanted to let you know that I will be having guests on talking about so many different things around relationships with father wound and intimate relationships. It's not just going to be me sitting here sharing my story. I want you to know that this podcast is about giving back to you, being able to give you the tools that you need to change to change your life and to cut the cord and break the cycle. So there's no point in me just sitting here sharing all my stories. I know that it is good to have insight and things like that, but I want to be able to give back to you. So we will be starting off the next episode with manifesting healthy relationships. I also really want to dive into the other side. So I want to speak to the father side of it all, someone that has been through it but has also done the work. Because at the end of the day, I also don't want this podcast to be about us as the victim. I don't want to be, poor me, I went through this, blaming the other person. I want to be able to see every angle of the situation to better myself. So bringing on someone that has been in a position, that my father has, but then has also had the awareness to make change, to have a better life and a better relationship with their daughters or their kids. So we'll be diving into all things of that, as well as having a relationship therapist on as well. I feel like that will be an amazing episode as well, diving into all things relationships and love, which will be amazing. I can't wait to take you through this journey of breaking the cycle and improving your life and your relationships, whatever they may look like. So stay tuned for episode 2 in a couple of weeks, where we're manifesting healthy relationships.